Hello, I'm Dawn Westmoreland, hailing from Asheville, North Carolina, the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. Asheville, North Carolina is known for its beauty and its four-season appeal year-round. Coming from WPVM FM 103.7, the voice of Asheville, my show is called The Empowered Whistleblower. It's about blowing the whistle on strategies to have a better workplace. Now, when you hear that, you might be thinking of companies. No, it's companies, it's agencies, it's nonprofits, it's entrepreneurship, and it's about making it better. Today, I have Aparna Arvind on, and we're going to talk about mental health, wellness, how not to burn out. It's so very important because I know I've been an entrepreneur 11 years and I have burnt out many times because I did not practice good self-care. Now, my show airs every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time Zone. However, it is syndicated, so you may pick it up at a different time or a different day. So welcome, Aparna. How are you?
Hi, Dawn. I'm very well, thanks, and thrilled to be here
Yes.
talking about this.
So what city are you in?
I'm in Potomac, Maryland.
Okay. So when we talk about mental health, everybody gets this image of mental health like it's all bad. But what is mental health about?
So, mental health is very broad. It's really just about your state of mind and how you approach your environment, your physical state, and other triggers. I think a lot of times people associate mental health with mental health illness. And that's very different, of course, and that is when you actually have clinical issues. But mental fitness, and this is what I'm hoping we will have more time to talk about later, is really about that proactive approach to behaviors and practices that can, in some ways, protect you from moving into the spectrum of having mental health disorders or challenges.
And I think we should let our listeners know your medical background too.
Yes, so I am a trained primary care physician and I've practiced medicine for a couple of decades. Even though now I actually do not practice medicine, I've moved completely into the space of coaching and leadership development, and specifically, again, within coaching, a high emphasis on mental fitness and resilience for leaders.
Thank you for that. And that's a very impressive background, perfect for what you're doing today. So many people today are wanting to work for themselves, and then they get into starting work for themselves and they realize, oh my gosh, you find out really quickly what you're good at, what you're not good at. It's so easy to exhaust yourself. Let's start with, how do we maintain good balance in our lives?
It comes from a place of understanding what's important to you and what you need. A lot of times the balance gets broken when we're not listening to ourselves, not being in tune or attuned with what our body needs, what we need to refuel and recharge with. And when you start to make the time and space to reconnect with yourself, then you start to actually say, these are my priorities, these are my needs. And I always talk about starting from within yourself, the core, as being capabilities, boundaries, and then deciding what you can take on, what you need to park for the time being, where you need to pause, and what you need to keep doing to consistently recharge, to actually move forwards. So balance really is about you understanding your own needs and what you need to best engage with in order to feel recharged and centered.
And does sleep, exercise, things like that, does that come into effect with well balance?
Of course, when we think about well-being, there's no one thing that you need to do to really feel like you have, again, that balance and general sense of well-being. I bring up the analogy of human evolution. We've evolved with social connection. We've evolved actually with momentum, activity. We've evolved even to some extent with scarcity, right? And responding to scarcity by being strategic. So when you think about what you need for well-being, you've got to tap into all of that. You've got to think about what's the physical activity you need to do for that recharge. Again, I keep bringing back this thing of, what do you need to recharge? What are the social connections you need to feel like you're supported? What is the mental space you need? And what are those activities you need to do to bring more focus and bring more calm? Are you sleeping well enough? Look at your sleep hygiene. And then also, when we talked about critical thinking, it's getting your brain to think, which I think a lot of times now we're so busy, we don't actually pause to give ourselves moments to just think about what we need, how to respond to a situation, because we're always in this very reactive mode. When we try to address all of that, you actually get to a state of well-being, but it has to be an active process. I tell clients that I engage with to say, there are a lot of things that are outside of your sphere of control, but there is definitely a space that you can control. And when you reconnect with yourself, it's like you putting yourself in the driver's seat and saying, where do I need to go? Where do I want to go? I'm no longer in autopilot. And when you're not on autopilot, you're being intentional about your well-being.
I'm glad you brought that up, Aparna, because, the United States culture has been this way for a long, long time. Busy, busy, busy. You got to stay busy, busy, busy. You're on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. And one thing I see is there's certain people that are always posting. And I'm thinking, gosh, do they ever get a break? Do they ever, when do you know enough is enough for your work?
Once again, when you're in tune with your physical sensations and your emotions, you tap into them, and your body tells you, right? It's like saying you're running a marathon, but at some point your body gives in and says, hang on, actually, I need to take a break. When you listen and you take that break, you have the ability to recharge and move forwards. But if you choose to disregard the messages that you're getting from your physical body, you're likely to burn out. So I think figuring out when enough is enough is, again, being very attuned to your emotional state, to your physical state, and recognizing the boundaries that you need to create in order to respect well-being. I always say it starts from a place of respecting yourself and the state that you actually envision yourself to be in, both physically and emotionally.
Mm-hmm. Now, as somebody who's been a doctor for decades, what have you seen in your practice, where people have burned out? I mean, what kind of medical issues have they had that they've come to you?
So, burnout in itself, and maybe we should spend a couple of moments just describing what burnout is, because there is some misunderstanding as well around it. The term burnout is used interchangeably, sometimes for a tough day at work, a big project or challenge that's come up, and that's not what burnout is. Burnout, according to the WHO, is actually a syndrome where it develops across different stages, and it's multidimensional. So, the key 3 pillars of burnout to make a diagnosis of burnout is, you have emotional exhaustion, you're depersonalized, so you're quite cynical about your work and the relationships that you have at work, and there's disengagement as well. So you literally withdraw from those social connections that you have at the workplace. So when someone is burnt out, what you start to see is they don't want to show up at work. They're like, I wake up in the morning and I don't want to go to work anymore. I have nothing to look forward to. You'll start to see a lot more conflict happening at work as well, because again, there's that lack of engagement. There's a high level of anxiety. So I've seen people who, had like high blood pressure or haven't been eating well enough because they're not even focused on their nutrition anymore, and have issues of prediabetes. They become very sedentary because they're so withdrawn. They just don't want to again engage with the stressor anymore. So oftentimes when you sit with a client and you look at the context that's brought them to your consultation room, you just start to draw upon certain themes that are emerging. And a lot of that actually comes from not creating sufficient boundaries around what you can work, not prioritizing what those key things are that you can focus. It's the alignment of resource versus capacity, so you've only got resources to do X amount, but the the demand that's asking for those resources is a lot higher. So that misalignment is usually where people feel like they can't continue anymore. And again, when, like I said, when you address those underlying causes and what we refer to as root causes that drive someone down the cascade of burnout, you're a lot more effective in tackling burnout. And again, it's not one solution. There's usually a multi-pronged approach that you need to take.
Mm-hmm. So when you work with people today, you as a coach, do you also do consulting?
Do you mean medical consulting?
Well, working with people with burnout, whether it's medical or just helping them to have better boundaries in their work, things like that, such.
So I do not do any form of medical consulting whatsoever. I strictly keep it within the coaching realm. There is, of course, the role of mentorship, and there's some role of training, because I do some training around emotional intelligence and mental fitness as well. But I do try and keep it well within the scope of really coaching, because coaching is, as you know, it is about empowering individuals to find the solutions to their problems and their current state and context. And which is why I often bring up the shift in my career from a very prescriptive approach to the coaching approach. I also noticed a lot of success when behavioral coaching came into play during my medical career as well, is when you actually engage the individual to be very intentional about the steps that will work for them, and then you support them. You help them with the accountability. There's a lot more success.
And you brought up emotional intelligence, Aparna. I know what it is, but some of our listeners may not know what it is. What is emotional intelligence, and how does it relate to burnout?
So emotional intelligence is really learning to understand yourself, your own emotions, and the emotions of others as you interact with them. It means you are more authentic, you are more sensitive to nuanced behaviors in others, and you're able to regulate your own emotions to different circumstances. Really, being emotionally intelligent means you're no longer reactive, you're responding to situations. And so you learn skills on communication, you learn skills on being active listeners, showing empathy, both, again, like I said, to yourself and to others. And it's just very much recognizing the role emotions play in our day-to-day lives. And rather than sort of shutting them out and saying, let me not visit that, is actually invite the emotions, sit with them, understand what they are, and then craft an appropriate response, an emotional response to, again, a situation that is productive, that isn't in any way counterproductive.
Yeah. And one thing is that there is a collectiveness of fear out in our world, and it's broad, whether it's about politics, climate change, what am I trying to say? Just cost of goods, inflation is what I'm trying to get out and such. And, how do people maintain their fear? Because I believe we all have fear, correct? How do they maintain it and also not deal with burnout?
So I'd say not maintain fear. The goal is not to maintain fear. Maybe bringing in a little bit of neuroscience into it. You see, fear has been part of the fight or flight response. So again, human evolution, when we saw tigers everywhere, the amygdala in the brain would kind of switch on. We get all that sympathetic responses in place to protect us. So either you run away from the threat or face it head on, but you've got all the necessary capacity to face it head on. That's supposed to be fleeting. It's not supposed to linger. But what we do see today is there are different forms of threats that are not the same as actually a life-threatening situation of having a tiger in front of you. And the amygdala stays switched on. Now, when the amygdala switches on, the executive functioning in our prefrontal lobe actually starts to dampen. And what we need in response to challenge is actually executive functioning. We need to be able to think with clarity. You cannot think with clarity and respond with clarity and composure if you're functioning out of a very hyperactive amygdala or a sympathetic response or a fight or flight response. So I would just perhaps say, again, we talked about giving ourselves time to evaluate a situation. So mindfulness practices are used quite often, right? It could be deep breathing exercises or engaging other senses just to bring a sense of calm. What happens when we say you're bringing a sense of calm is you're actually dampening the amygdala and you're now accessing pathways into that executive functioning of your brain. So then you're making judgments with a clear head. When we use the term, do I have a clear head about it, is what part of your brain are you accessing?
Yeah.
You've got to cut down the fog to get there. So I would just say that, look, again, there's a sphere of lack of control. That's those extraneous circumstances, the fuel prices, inflation, some things that you cannot do much about. But what you do have control over is your response to it and how you choose to prime your body and your mind to get into an emotional state that is calming. Because we recognize that staying in that highly anxious state doesn't actually change the outcome of what's happening. It doesn't change the extraneous circumstance. We continue to struggle. So it's about recognizing there's no benefit in staying in that state. What does benefit us is having a clear head about what we need to do.
And I like what you said, Aparna. Basically what I heard from you is, we get to frame or reframe what's going on in our world. We can sit there and look at the bad things, focus on that, focus on the good. Have you worked with a client where you've made radical change for them or helped work, with them to make radical changes?
Of course. Any change of any sort requires laying down new neural pathways and for new behaviors, right? We are all creatures of habit. I remember listening to Atomic Habits, and the author brings up an excellent point of saying, we weren't born with the habit to get up and make ourselves a cup of coffee, right? We weren't born with the habit of checking our phones when we get up in the day. Not to say that that's in any way healthy, but these are things from repeated behaviors. And that's happened that every time we have done something a particular way, we've laid down a pathway on our brain, a neural pathway to create the response. And we keep doing that again and again, and ingrains into habit. That's where change happens. Otherwise, it's not really change. We think we've changed, but we haven't quite. So to your point of, have I dealt with clients who have made radical shifts in their lives? Absolutely. I can bring up an example. Again, I am a leadership coach, but when it comes to mental fitness, individuals and their well-being, they have different goals set for their well-being. One could be, again, improving nutrition, getting into a healthier physical state. And so I had this client who had struggled for a couple of decades in just really formulating the habit that was needed to get to that state of better nutrition, better weight management. And all we did was not focus on the outcomes, but simply habit formation. And it meant one thing in the beginning, one shift, and then stacking a second behavior and stacking a third behavior. And once those, like I said, those neural pathways were solidly ingrained, you start to see the change. The client starts to see the outcome. So not only has the behavior changed, but the goal they wanted to get to, you get to that. Because everything is about consistency in practice. And I think that's the other thing everyone should realize. We all want to change. Give yourself some grace and recognizing you need time. We have something biologically has got to change for us to really change. But it's just about the consistency. Small, consistent steps done over and over and over again get you there.
Aparna, you brought up social media. When I think of social media, I think, oh my gosh, sometimes it can be so exhausting reading all the different posts that are on LinkedIn, on Facebook. There's so much noise out there. Does it affect burnout?
Oh, of course it does. It does. Because distraction really does promote burnout as well. When you have too much that you open yourself up to, no filters. I talked about the resource versus demand misalignment. So if you have too much and you're not being very selective in creating boundaries of what is important to you, what do you need to engage with? How does this in any way relate to your overarching purpose? If you don't pause to ask yourself those questions and then set in place those boundaries, you are going to get burnt out. You have FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. People say, well, unless I do 10 things, and I see this commonly with entrepreneurs as well, is saying, can you just focus on the one thing? And we talked about consistent repetition to get to a goal. You can get so distracted because everybody's doing everything else. Someone or the other is trying to sell you some tool that will lead to success. Eventually, you haven't even given enough time and resource to the one thing to master it and just, see what happens. You're not even waiting for the outcome. So again, you're just dividing your valuable resources across too many different things, and you're not actually even getting one thing done, one critical thing done. So yes, absolutely, social media or not having those boundaries and the disciplines for yourself and saying, I will engage with this one tool because yes, I've thought about it. This can help me on this journey. And that's about it. I will stop there. Apply, because again, we say, some amount of insight is helpful, but unless you apply it, it's meaningless. So I see scrolling is trying to gain lots and lots and lots of insight. And at the end of the day, you have no energy to actually apply anything. And, for us to learn, just like multitasking isn't a real thing at all, you need to do one thing at a time. You've got to say, what are those boundaries I need to create to ensure that I'm focusing on the one thing that's most meaningful right now? And nothing's going to disappear. If you don't look at it, everything you put on the internet stays on the internet forever. So you can always come back to it if curiosity really drives you down that path. But really, focus is what's going to get you there. So absolutely, focus can help you tackle burnout.
One thing I know for sure is in the United States, people do a lot of comparing. They compare themselves with other people. I don't know if that's universal, but I know in the United States that people do that. And when they do that, sometimes they feel like I'm not enough, or so-and-so is way ahead of me. Does that even come into effect with what we're talking about today?
Sure. So if we bring up the topic of burnout, burnout, of course, has been looked at quite intensely across healthcare, because it's a common industry that you see a lot of burnout with. But lately, as burnout has become more and more a sort of mainstream buzzword to really think about, it's on everyone's mind. You're starting to see that emerge across different industries as well, like in finance, technology, etc. And everyone's trying to, in a market where, say, there's scarcity of jobs, everyone's trying to be at their peak performance. So they're looking at what someone on the left is doing, what someone's on the right doing. Again, not pausing to think about aligning their strengths to their purpose and their passion, because I feel like purpose and passion are like having a full fuel tank. You can go really far, but if you're going to try and operate from an empty power tank where you don't have clarity on your purpose and passion, then you are probably going to get distracted. You're going to take all the wrong turns. Think about a journey of going from A to B, and there's a straight road. Purpose and passion can keep you on the straight road. When that's missing, you start going into all these little nooks and alleys, and you're still quite lost. And you're emptying that fuel tank of yours. So yes, comparison. Look, no judging here at all. We're all human beings, and I think I want to be respectful of the fact that even I myself have experienced that in my own career, where you tend to get distracted because you're so concerned that you may not be doing exactly what's needed because X, Y, and Z are doing 20 other things. But you get to the point where, you actually cannot do everything. Same process of not multitasking, focus. What's the one thing I'm really good at? How can I champion that? And how can I showcase that strength? And how can I align that with the passion? Because that's what people will pick up on. They'll pick up on that enthusiasm and love for what you're doing. That eventually is really long-term success for both for yourself and if it's an organization that you're working for as well. I know it was a long-winded response to your question.
A good response too. And if you're listening in, I am Dawn Westmoreland coming from Asheville, North Carolina, hailing from WPVM FM LP 103.7, the voice of Asheville. I'm talking to Aparna Arvind, who is a former primary care medical doctor. We're talking about burnout. Now, Aparna, how can people reach out to you if they want to find out more about your services? Do you have a contact information out there?
Of course, and I'd be thrilled to entertain any questions on this topic as well. So my company is Christopher Leah Consulting. Like I said, we're based in Potomac, Maryland. Our website URL is www.christopherleah.com. And for any email queries, you can reach out to info@christopherleah.com. And my number is 202-569-2925. Once again, happy to answer any questions. The website has all the information that one would need regarding my services.
Aparna, where do you want to go with your work? What do you hope to do?
I've had this vision of creating organizational ecosystems. You know, as an ecosystem, you know that there are so many interdependencies, but there's a thriving community. We're all connected to one another. It comes from a basic concept of community. So I really would love the world to be a place where organizations were communities of thriving individuals who are very connected with themselves, those that they work with. They feel supported. They feel like they understand their purpose, and you know they're resilient because change is constant. So I'm really hoping. I'm a relentless optimist. I'll put that out there. And so the goal is to spend the next significant part of my life contributing towards leadership development and coaching individuals to thrive in whatever endeavor they're involved in.
And you brought up a good word, one of my favorites, resiliency. Is there a way to teach people how to be more resilient?
Of course, starts from, like I said, learning to connect with yourself, making time to say, let me really understand what my needs are. Let me understand where I need to go. And let me recognize those critical behaviors that I need to address that can help pick me up every time I do face a challenge. Because resilience is not just about coming back to baseline, but learning and growing from the setback. So it's just to say, do I give myself enough time and grace to look at a challenge that I've overcome and say, what do I need to learn from this? What do I need to do differently? And how can I make this new behavior a habit? That really is resilience.
Yes. And I want one more time for you to give your contact information out to the public.
Sure. So that's info@christopherleah.com or www.christopherleah.com. And that's Christopher with the PH.
Leah is L-E-A or L-E-A-H?
L-E-A-H. Yes.
Okay, very good. So we've been talking to Aparna Arvind about burnout. If you're having problems with burnout or you're just overwhelmed, you know, that can lead to burnout, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
If you have questions,
and like I said, preventative approach is key. So really recognizing some of those key behaviors that lead to overwhelm. And the earlier you tackle it, you actually just don't get to burnout, but you can address burnout at any stage.
So it's better to be reactive than proactive, is what I'm hearing.
Responsive, responsive, yes, and proactive.
Aparna, I want to thank you for being on the show. Thank you for your insights and also bringing in just a little bit of a medical aspect so that we understand what's going on inside our bodies, inside our brains when it comes to burnout. It's so important for self-care. Thank you so much for being on this show.
It's a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend this time with you, Dawn. Thank you.
For our listeners, stay empowered. Please reach out to Aparna if you have any questions, like to find out more about her services. And always know that there's solutions to everything. So stay empowered. If you have questions you want to get a hold of me, especially around resiliency, reach out to dawnwestmoreland.org. Stay empowered. We'll see you next time.